Hey everyone. So if you saw last week's video, then you know that I am re-releasing certain sections of the very long going back video that I released a couple years back. My reason for doing that is I would like the responses that I gave in that video to better correlate to the relevant videos they were responding to. So for example, in this video, I am responding to two comments I received in relation to my vaccines and quarantines video essay and its original follow-up. This way I can include that feedback and my responses to it directly after those videos in the channel playlists. In the case of this particular video, I will also be adding a retraction that I had included in my third going back video, but was related to the vaccines and quarantines follow-up. That will come at the end of this video after the part where I address the comments. But let's go ahead and start with a comment from Jared Millirons. Why did the occupants of the Swan have to keep pushing the button when they knew there was a failsafe? Seems like they should have just released the energy, rip off the Band-Aid style. I mean, the sky turned violet, the island was visible for like 5 minutes max, fertility reigned once more. The world continued living, and folks moved on. Please correct me if I missed something. I would love to have that loose end tied up. Because at this point, I see nothing happened besides Desmond becoming super dupes. So yeah, I think that's a pretty good question that I feel I have a pretty good answer to. First of all, I don't think there's any reason Kelvin or Desmond or Rudzinski before them would have expected to survive detonating the failsafe. Doing so seems to implode the station, which you would think that if that giant burst of electromagnetism wouldn't kill the person turning the key, then surely the imploding station would. I don't think there's any way that they would have expected for that person to have become displaced from the implosion zone, the way that Desmond is. Furthermore, there is that issue of the electromagnetism itself. There is no reason to think anybody would survive that either. As we go on to find out throughout the rest of the series, Desmond's resistance to electromagnetism is pretty unique. So the short answer to that, I think, would be that turning the key would essentially be a death sentence for the person doing it, at least as far as they know. And that's why Kelvin can't really muster up the courage to turn the key when Desmond finds him down there drunk. Now that does raise two interesting follow-up questions, one of which being, why is Desmond resistant to this electromagnetic energy? And the second being, why did Rudzinski not go ahead and turn the key, since he was apparently suicidal anyways? And at least that way, his death would serve the purpose of eliminating the whole Swan issue. I do have thoughts on both of these, but my response to the second one regarding Rudzinski is based pretty much entirely on my headcanon, and that's not something I really feel ready to share, specifically not in this way of me just kind of explaining it. So for now, I'll just say I think a dramatically simplified version of my answer, and an answer that is pretty sensible on its own, is that Rudzinski's behavior leading up to his death wasn't really rational anymore. I do talk about that quite a bit in my very first theory and explanation video, Vaccines and Quarantines. But as for the other question regarding why Desmond has this resistance to harm from electromagnetism, I think the reason this character and this character alone is seen to have this resistance is because of his unique level of exposure to it over a considerable amount of time. Desmond spent 3 years in the Swan, right next to this pocket of electromagnetism, while discharging it every 100 or so minutes consistently throughout that period. I think this caused him to gradually build up a tolerance for it. And for that reason, I actually think it's possible that Kelvin and Radzinski may also have been resistant to the electromagnetism the way Desmond is. But outside of those three characters, nobody else receives that constant level of exposure to the electromagnetism the way that they do. So the next comment I wanted to address is from that same video, and it is in reference to the headcanon that I shared about Annie's fate. Annie being the childhood friend of Ben, who we never really see explicitly what happened to her. In this follow-up video, I shared what I have adopted as my own headcanon after this idea was shared to me by Lethologica02. That being the idea that Annie either remained on the island after the incident or returned to it, and that when her and Ben were a bit older, they actually conceived a child together. But because this was obviously after the incident, she ended up dying. When Lethologica02 shared this, I found it really brilliant, and it really clicked with a lot of ideas I already kind of had in my head about Ben's backstory. And in my eyes, it really contextualized Ben's motivations in a way that I find extremely fascinating. And just one part of that is why he is so focused on the fertility issues. That's something that Richard refers to when he speaks to Locke. This idea that Ben is wasting their time on this one issue when they're really there for more important reasons. Anyways, it was this piece of headcanon that Rochelle23 is responding to. And she says, "The theory of Annie's pregnancy is fascinating, but I think that it's more simple than that. In my opinion, Ben is obsessed with finding a solution to the fertility problem because his mother died giving birth to him. It doesn't happen on the island, but this thing has affected him since he was little. Not only because he grew up without a mother, but because his father blamed him for his wife's death." So yeah, I absolutely agree that this is likely a psychological factor behind Ben's actions. I also think that the Annie explanation explains them a little better. My reasoning for that is mostly that Ben's obsession with the fertility issue doesn't seem particularly rooted in saving the mothers. I feel like this would surely be the case if his main motivation was what happened to his mother. But instead, he refuses to let Juliet take any of the mothers off the island, even though he knows this could potentially save their lives. And when Juliet expresses that she can't solve the problem because all of the mothers die, Ben coldly states, "Then we'll find more mothers."
It's impossible. The mothers keep dying.
Then we'll find more mothers. Who knows? Maybe there's even one on that plane.
Again, he doesn't actually seem too concerned with the well-being of the mothers themselves. And that continues to be the case at the end of season 3 when he plans on abducting any of the women that might be pregnant within the 815ers camp. He does not at all seem to be motivated by a concern for them, but rather he simply wants them for research purposes. So when considering that, I think it makes more sense that his obsession is driven more by a desire to eradicate this thing that took from him the woman that he loved, not to mention his unborn child. I think that makes more sense as a motivation than the idea that he's trying to prevent what happened to his mother from happening to anyone else. And I do also feel like this explanation of what happened to Annie contextualizes the way in which he looks at the Annie doll on the morning of the purge in a much more satisfying way than if she had just moved away several years earlier. Because in my mind, if Annie died because of the fertility issues that Dharma had caused, This would likely be a huge motivation in why he is choosing to participate in and execute the purge. Okay, and now I'm going to edit in the retraction that I included in my third going back video, but was related to vaccines and quarantines. In that video, I shared my thoughts on what happened to Ben's childhood friend Annie, and while doing so, I explained my interpretation of the painting that we see displayed prominently in Ben's house as depicting Annie. However, a commenter by the name of Ben Ward recently pointed out to me that you can actually see that painting in Ben's flashbacks in The Man Behind the Curtain when he's just a child. And that, of course, definitively rules out what I, liked to believe the picture was depicting. Its presence in Ben's childhood home within the barracks indicates that it is actually depicting his mother. I was originally resistant to this idea for a couple of reasons. The first one was because I hadn't realized it was in Ben's childhood home. So I thought that Ben would have commissioned the painting or had painted it himself maybe. Not that we ever see him demonstrate that skill set or hobby. But yeah, I just thought it was kind of weird that he would have a painting done of his mom, who he never even knew, and then displayed it in his living room. That struck me as odd. Of course, now that I realize it was in his childhood home, that would indicate it wasn't Ben that painted it or had it painted. Which brings me to the second reason that I didn't really think it was the mom, because it also didn't seem within character, in my opinion, for Roger to have a painting drawn up of her. He just doesn't really strike me as that type of sentimental, I guess. That said, that's just my subjective interpretation of him. He's a human being with, complex layers. So I by no means am saying that it's a plot hole that he would have that. Also, there are potentially other explanations, such as maybe Ben's mom, Emily, was a painter herself, and maybe she painted a self-portrait while she was pregnant with Ben. Maybe that's what the little fragile gerbil-like creature represents, is Ben as a fetus. So yeah, maybe she painted it, and then when she died, Roger held on to it. That I would find a little bit easier for me to swallow as far as my views on Roger as a character. The point is, as much as I liked the idea of the painting being Annie, this is clearly not the case, and I wanted to set the record straight on that. As I've said before, everything that I share as far as theories and interpretations, I try to support it with evidence, and at the very least, I don't want there to be any evidence that outright contradicts it. And in this case, there absolutely is evidence that contradicts it. And thank you, Ben, for pointing that out. Now, with all of that said, and acknowledging that the painting does not depict Annie, I do still think everything that I said about what happened to her, I do still hold that as my personal headcanon. Obviously, the painting was just a nice extra piece to that. The theory of what happened to Annie didn't rely on that painting to be true. So yeah, I still think that is the most compelling case for what happened to her. I just needed to set the record straight that I was wrong in thinking that the painting could represent her. Oh, you're still here. Hopefully that means you enjoyed this video. If so, please consider sticking around and being a constant for this channel by clicking right up here to subscribe. And don't forget to hit the bell icon if you would like to be notified when more videos like this one arrive. In the meantime, feel free to check out previous content from this channel by clicking here or here. Oh no.
Please subscribe.